Hello and welcome to this one of your Leatherhead member webinars looking at sustainable diets. And specifically, we'll be looking at it from the consumer point of view and considering whether we're actually ready to change our habits and eat sustainably. I'm Emma Gubish, the Head of Consumer Science here at Leatherhead Food Research. I'll be talking today for about 20 to 25 minutes, and then we'll have about 5 minutes at the end for any of your questions. So please do send through any questions you have for me on the chat facility, and I'll have a look at those at the end of the webinar. If I don't get a chance to answer them today, if you provide your contact details, we can answer them via email after the webinar. So, sustainable diets, are we ready to change our habits? Because actually changing our habits isn't an easy thing to do. So I wanted to reflect on today on what a sustainable diet actually is, what it means to consumers, what might be standing in our way preventing us changing our diets, including the reality of our own behaviours and how hard it is to change them, and what might help us in moving to more sustainable diets. So what might the opportunities there be? Just before I move into the sort of the meat of our presentation, I just wanted to very quickly tell you a little bit about my team. I'm sure you're all familiar with Leatherhead because you are all members. So my team is the consumer and sensory team, and we partner with our various colleagues at Leatherhead and also the broader science group to bring that consumer voice to our projects. And we're very much helping clients to protect their existing portfolios, to stretch into new areas, and also in that kind of innovation and disrupt space. So where we're looking at new technologies, new ingredients, and actually what might the future be for those new technologies. And it's very much about, as I say, bringing that consumer viewpoint to those kind of projects. So if you're protecting your existing portfolio, how can you differentiate your product? How can you improve the quality of it? How can you manage your heritage brands and think about what the future is for those brands? If you're stretching, it's all about how you can stretch into new spaces, looking for those sensory and consumer opportunities. And in that innovate and disrupt space, it's really about what do consumers think about those new technologies, those new ingredients, and actually are the consumers ready for those developments? And we really specialize in blending sensory science with consumer attitudes and also bringing in that behavioral science lens. And we really do find that by blending these different methods, we can get a better understanding of human experience in all its inconsistencies. That's where you bring in that behavioral lens. Actually, sometimes people might say that they're going to do something, but then behave in a different way. So it's kind of unpicking those differences, really. We have a sensory trained panel here at Leatherhead Food Research with a lot of experience for over 20 years in different product categories. And we really find the value in blending that sensory science with the consumer attitudes as well. So what better way really than to start by talking to consumers themselves? We went out and asked our consumer panel, our panel of consumers in the UK, and we asked them, what does a sustainable diet mean to you? And I just wanted to share some of the sort of the unfiltered quotes really from the consumers themselves, because I think it can really illuminate these kind of questions. So this person here saying, a diet that respects the needs of people today without compromising the needs of future generations, namely one that doesn't use excessive amounts of energy and resources or wreck the ecology of the earth. So this is someone here who's thinking about the future, very much thinking about, are the energy and resources going to be around for future generations? So yeah, not just thinking about themselves, but thinking about the needs of people in the future too. Following a vegan diet and producing meals from scratch to avoid as much packaging and factory production as possible, trying to avoid palm oil and keeping up to date on food manufacturers who contribute to deforestation, and then trying to avoid buying their produce. Also on buying the food I need to avoid wastage. So this person making personal decisions about a particular diet, so following a vegan diet, but also potentially avoiding certain ingredients like palm oil, or looking on a very detailed way about what particular manufacturers are actually doing and the impact that they're having on the environment. Oh, I'll take you through a few more to illuminate what our panel was saying. So something that can continue in the long run, not short-lived or a fad. Being mindful that resources are not infinite and actions have consequences. So very much this idea that it can't be something that we can just, it's not a quick fix. It's got to be something that we can all live with. It can't be this kind of faddy diet. We're all used to that idea of diets being quite faddy, but actually a sustainable diet is one that by its very nature we can continue. One that comes from sustainable resources, including where it comes from and its carbon footprint, environmental preservation, and personal resources that I can sustain. So someone really thinking about the environmental impact there, very much going down to the point of thinking about their carbon footprint. One that takes into account sustainable farming, fishing, and eating local seasonal produce. One that provides a balanced amount of nutrients from foods that are from local sources and with reduced impact on the environment and using less plastic, for example. So here we're seeing someone bringing that idea now of nutrition into it, that actually if the foods don't have the nutrients that I need in them, then it's not going to be a very sustainable way of eating. And someone at the top there thinking specifically about particular industries and their impact from a sustainability point of view. So aggregating all those kind of comments that came in when we asked that question, these are some of the characteristics of what a sustainable product actually is. So these are kind of the signposts, or the kind of the things that will jump out to people and tell them that the product you're producing is something which is sustainable. So very much this idea of having less processing, less manufacturing. It's a much simpler and natural product. If it's a locally produced product and has had fewer air miles or fewer transit miles to actually get the product to the consumer, that also shouts out that it's sustainable. People talking about something which is seasonal, because that idea that you're not sort of artificially trying to produce ingredients or fruit and vegetables or manufactured products at times of the year which they wouldn't normally be grown. Less packaging, particularly people calling out the point about having less plastic, including ethically sourced ingredients. So in some of those quotes, people were talking about the impact of palm oil or the impact of products in terms of deforestation. A low carbon footprint or carbon neutral, and also people thinking about organic, chemical free, or no pesticides. I think the organic point was a little bit less common, but this idea about something that's been produced and manufactured from a chemically free point of view, or not using pesticides. And then when we combine that together, to think about kind of a way to describe it, a sustainable product is one which does not deplete the world's resources. And what did our consumers think about the characteristics of a sustainable diet? What did they think that would be? So again, in a similar kind of way, they were actually thinking, well, that kind of diet would be actually a really healthy kind of diet. It would actually be good quality. It would contain all the essential things that I need, from proteins, carbohydrates, fats, vitamins, minerals. A lot of people thinking that it could be a vegetarian or vegan diet, or even a plant-based one. But and some people not thinking that it would be as far as a vegan diet, but actually it would be someone who's trying to eat less meat, actively saying they're going to sort of have their, the meat-free Mondays, or at least 2 days a week having less meat. In terms of behaviors, people thought it might mean that they'd be cooking more from scratch. There would be no or a lot less food wastage. And again, this point that we've mentioned before about it being long lasting, but also actually easy and effective. It's got to be something that people can stick to. and very much eliminating those particular ingredients or particular foods that people believe to be particularly unsustainable. So when we kind of draw that together into a summary, there was this kind of idea of a sustainable diet gives me the nutrients I need and is a long-lasting way to eat. And actually, this was a quote from one of our consumers themselves. A healthy diet for the consumer, the planet, and society. And I think that's a really nice way of kind of summarizing it, this idea that a sustainable diet needs to work on many different fronts. We are in an ecosystem, so it's all very well if it might work for an individual, but if it's not working for the planet, if it's not working for broader humanity, then actually that isn't a sustainable diet. So these three, it's the kind of sweet spot between all these three working together. So from a planet point of view, it's about ensuring those food and beverage products aren't having a long-term damage to the planet. From a consumer or an individual point of view, it's about long-term sustainable way of eating, which aren't going to we're going to have all the nutrients that person needs, not going to make them put on extra weight, and something that they can stick to. And then from a societal point of view, one that actually not just respects the individual, but respects the broader society, and not just now, but for future generations to come as well. And I think this is a really interesting way of thinking about sustainable diets, in that what's good for us as humans is actually also in many ways what's good for the planet too, and the two can coexist together. So this is from the BCFN Foundation. They're a think tank looking at food sustainability. And they created this diagram, but I know many other companies have also, and organizations have also kind of used it as well. And on the left, you can see the sort of traditional food pyramid, where it shows the food products that you should eat in the quantities that you ought to eat them. So the ones at the bottom of the base of the pyramid you should be eating more of, and the ones at the top, the meat and the processed products, you should be eating a bit less of in your diet. And actually, we see the relationship from an environmental point of view, that actually the products we should be eating more of have a lower impact on the environment, and the ones that we should be eating a bit less of, those are the products which have a bigger impact on the environment. So it's quite an interesting relationship, I think, that actually, whilst it can be very hard to change people's habits, there's actually some inbuilt sense into this, and the way that it can potentially work. Um, I think one really important element to consider when we're talking about food sustainability is the fact that it's not just making sure we eat the right things, but actually, are we consuming everything that we're buying, everything that we're purchasing? And the reality is, in Western countries, we're buying much more than we need, and wasting a huge amount of food. So food that never gets eaten, and is thrown away even before we do anything with it. So some of these facts are quite staggering, I think, from the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. So over a third of all food produced globally goes to waste. An area larger than China is used to grow food that's never eaten. If food waste were a country, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases after China and the USA, and 2.3 billion people are joining the planet by 2050, which will require a 60 to 70% increase in global food production. So I think those are, really staggering facts, and I think it points to the fact that if all we could do, at the moment, is actually just to try and get a handle on our food waste, then actually that in itself would have a huge kind of impact on our food production. So it's going to be really key that to tackle this, we're going to have to tackle food waste, and trying to ensure that we are only purchasing the food we need. Um, and so, that should really be considered as part of this. Which kind of leads me to the question, are we actually paying the right amount for our food? Are we paying the right price for our food? If we can afford to throw away so much, like you could pose the question, is food actually too cheap? It is a difficult question, because there are obviously many people in the world who can't afford to buy the food that they need, whether that's in various different countries around the world. In the UK, for example, our average household annual expenditure on food is about 11%. Which is down from 33% in the 1950s. So we're spending a lot less on our food that we sort of buy from at the supermarket. So in many ways, you could say that's a success story in terms of sort of growing wealth in certain countries. But I think in terms of sustainability, you begin to ask, are we actually paying the right price? And if we are throwing away so much food, are we actually paying too cheap a price? So I think it's an interesting dynamic to consider as part of this discussion. Is there something that's out of kilter? We have been conditioned to look for bargains and for the cheapest versions of products. When you think about the sort of the supermarket wars, instead of potentially thinking about the environmental cost of the product itself, there is that kind of expectation that food should be cheap. And maybe we have to sort of come up against some of the realities that we might have to think in a different way about food. So that takes me on to another key dimension here about our behaviours. And behaviours are hard to change. So if we go back to the name of our webinar today, are we ready to change our habits? If we think about ourselves as consumers and our own behaviours, we aren't always completely rational in the way we behave. We can behave in unpredictable ways. We might say we want to do something and then go off and do something different. And it's not that we're being disingenuous or that we mean to sort of give the wrong impression. It's just that things happen in our lives that mean we go off and do something else for whatever reason. And I think when you think about diets and exercise, this is a perfect example really of how we might set off with good ambitions. We might want to lose that weight, we might want to eat more healthily or do more exercise, but that intention might not always go through into action. And I think that's important to reflect in terms of sustainability as well, that actually we have to first want that intention to change, then we need to turn those intentions into actions, and then finally turning them into habits. Because once they become habits and they become something which is much more automatic, it's when you have to think about things that there's potentially a danger that you don't then sort of see that through. So sort of thinking about the psychology behind it, we have these two cognitive systems which impact our behavior. Our system 1 thinking, which is very fast, intuitive, automatic and controlled, and our system 2 thinking, which is much more slow and thoughtful and reflective, more effortful. We tend to be in that system 2 mode when we're learning something new, when we're doing something that we've not done before. So if you've never learned an instrument, a musical instrument, you would be in that system 2 process while you're learning it. But once you have practiced, you'll begin to do things a bit more intuitively, a bit more automatically, and that behavior will then move into more of a system 1 behavior. And it's the same with things like diets and exercise. The more something is new for us, we'll be in that system 2 one. But the more we do it again and again and again, it becomes this habit, and then it will move into system 1. And if you're doing something more intuitively and automatically, you're more likely to kind of continue doing it. As I say, that sort of action becoming a habit, really. So I think it's really interesting to reflect on human sort of behavior in the context of sustainability. But I do also want to reflect on how far I think that we are coming and how much change has actually happened already. If you think back even in the last 10, 20 years, how much the food and beverage industry has actually changed in terms of the way people are eating. There have been some really huge changes, and people are aware of the need to change. So in our research with our consumers, 7 in 10 consumers said they're concerned about the resources available to feed the world population. So there is that awareness and that concern. And I think if we talk about behaviour, if you're the first step is to be aware of it, and then it's to make the changes. And almost half of UK consumers report making changes to their habits in the last 12 months. because of their concerns about the sustainability of the world's resources. So again, those are big numbers really that people are sort of making changes. I think, in the past people might have thought that the environment and sustainability might have been the kind of the area for only a particular group of consumers to get concerned about. But I think we're seeing this becoming much more of a mainstream issue. And here we break down some of the actions that people have been doing. So we can see at the top there, people buying more locally produced products. That might also be to do with COVID, of course, that people aren't able to travel so much. So they are looking to local ways of purchasing food. 44% eating less meat, 36% saying that they're eating more plant-based food, and 29% buying more foods and ingredients which have been produced sustainably. So very much thinking about the kind of the impact of those things. So I do think there's a lot of positivity around this. And I think when we think about the future, I think we can think about how technology can enable us to eat more sustainably, both in the home and the supply chain. So if you think about the supply chain, technology can help us track the food that's available to us and understand its sustainability credentials. So I don't know if you've heard about technology such as blockchain, which can it records something over time and doesn't allow that information to be deleted. So it kind of can give a really honest way to record the history of where those ingredients and products have traveled and the supply chain journey of those products. So we can use technology to help us in this challenge really. And if you think about in the home, we can there's the emergence of things like smart fridges, which could reorder products for us when we've run out of them, or alert us to when products are going to run out of date. At the supermarket, this is a supermarket in Italy showing more digital ways of telling you information about your products and potentially where it's come from. Traditionally we think about turning a product over and looking at the ingredients on the back of the product, but I think here, there are different ways that we can help us, or that can be enable us to understand the sustainability criteria. I just wanted to mention a case study that we did in this area for Harvest Plus. So they're an organisation which create biofortified crops. So these are crops which are higher in certain nutrients than kind of your average crop. And so they might have sort of wheat products that are higher in iron, or sweet potatoes that are higher in vitamin A, for example. And at Leatherhead, we brought in different lenses to understand this issue. So we brought in the regulatory landscape to understand what regulation might be involved in this new technology of biofortified crops. We brought in our scientific expertise to understand the actual reality of how you would manufacture products containing these crops, and what impact does the manufacturing have on the nutrient quality, how much nutrients are remaining in that product when you manufacture them. And then we brought in that consumer insight to really understand what consumers think about this opportunity. What are their concerns? What do they see as an opportunity? And bringing that sort of those different lenses can really help a company understand what the value of this new technology might be. So that really brings me to sort of my final slide, which I wanted to go back to that one which I mentioned before about the UK consumer, kind of nicely summarised for us. That a sustainable diet really is a healthy diet for the consumer, the planet, and society. And I do think that is a really nice way to summarize it. And hopefully I've taken you through some of those different lenses to think about, what we need to align to actually sort of enable sustainable diets to become a bit more of a reality and a bit more mainstream. So thank you very much for listening. I'm just going to see if we've got any questions in the chat facility. So I've got one here. How will the progress of sustainable diets affect veganism? Are vegans and vegan diets already heading in a good direction? So that's a really interesting question, I think, and I think is borne out in the research that many people are moving initially to more plant-based diets, so perhaps not excluding meat completely from their diet, but eating more plant-based products, plant-based foods. And then obviously you have people who choose to be vegetarians or even to go and become vegans themselves. And I think when we think about that, the environmental pyramid and the health pyramid, I think eating more plant-based products is the road to enabling more sustainability. Whether people need to go completely to a vegan diet is obviously their particular decision, and then they would have to think about it obviously from a nutritional point of view to make sure that they are getting all the nutrition that they need. But I do think a sustainable diet probably will be more of a plant-based diet. That's not to say that it is cutting out all meat products. I've got another one here. How can we tackle the problem with food waste? So I think it's really what I was mentioning before about technology being the enabler really here. I think, people are very, very busy, and I know myself that it's hard to keep track basically of what you have in your kitchen and what you have in your fridge. Even if you have every will in the world to try not to waste food, you have to be really on top of your game to make sure you use it all up before you have to throw anything out. So I do think technology could help us, whether it's sort of recipe apps or kind of moving to these more smart devices which can record what we have in our kitchens, in our fridges. Whether it's more behavioural things around us shopping less in bulk, which we're seeing. Well, we did see a trend to people shopping a bit more frequently. I think with COVID, we then have seen a bit more of a step back to people shopping kind of once a week again, but shopping a bit more frequently for the things that you need rather than, bulk buying, a whole array of things that you might not then end up using. And obviously, you're then saving money as well because you're not actually paying for things that you don't need. So I think those are the final questions I can take just at the moment because of the timing, but I will take any other questions and I'll try and send an email in response to those ones. So thank you very much for your time today, and I hope I've given you some interesting thoughts around sustainability. And if you did want to get in touch with me again to ask any questions, my email is emma.gubish@leatherheadfood.com.